Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you so much for joining us. We're doing a live broadcast every day at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. in Alberta. Really hope that you are enjoying the new news format where we walk you through all the news of the day, and we are usually joined by a guest or two to have a good conversation. So if you like it, don't forget to please like this video. It really helps with the algorithm. So if you're watching, you enjoy it, all you have to do is just give us a little like there, and it will help allow this video to be seen by more and more Canadians. And it's just so important that we do that. We want more Canadians to know the truth. If you're listening to this podcast on audio and you like it, please consider leaving us a 5-star review and go ahead and subscribe to True North and to my channel so that you never miss an update. So we have a lot to get to. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to be joined a little bit later on by Sam Cooper, who I think is the best investigative journalist in the country. He is uncovering incredibly crazy things about our country, about China, and just how much of a foothold China has in Canada. So we're going to be talking with him about fentanyl and about foreign interference in our elections. Later in the show, I'm going to be joined by a self-proclaimed non-woke leftist. We're going to talk about Mark Carney. We're going to talk about Jagmeet Singh, and we're going to get to everything else. But first, I think the most important thing that I want to talk to you about today, let's talk about Justin Trudeau and his latest attempt to manipulate Canadians and control the media. So on Wednesday, we learned that the Trudeau government had ended its own self-imposed ban on advertising on Meta platforms. So starting soon, you'll once again be able to see Government of Canada ads on Facebook and Instagram. The Privy Council office, which is filled with Justin Trudeau's own personal bureaucrats, recently spent $100,000 promoting Justin Trudeau's GST tax holiday shtick, which was designed to bribe Canadians with our own money in order to boost Justin Trudeau's public image. But wait a minute. Back in July of 2023, Justin Trudeau himself pledged not to give any money to Meta, that no government advertising would be spent on Meta because Meta had decided to pull Canadian news from its platforms. So why would Meta pull Canadian news from its platforms? Well, because one component of Justin Trudeau's censorious Online News Act was an attempt to shake down the tech giant to force them to give a bailout to failing Canadian news companies. At the time, Meta founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg said no to that request. And in turn, Justin Trudeau pulled Canada's measly government ad spend. Well, now that Trudeau needs to use Zuckerberg's platforms to promote his own vote-buying scheme for the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau is walking that back. But Meta's news ban still applies, making it so that Canadians cannot view or share news stories on its platforms. So thanks to Justin Trudeau's meddling in the market of Canadian news, independent organizations like True North have lost a huge part of our audience, including the millions of Canadians who used to interact with our stories on Facebook and Instagram. So did you get that? Trudeau is saying it's okay for him and his government to be back on Facebook and Instagram, but it's not okay for journalists and organizations like True North. Very fitting, very rich. Now, you probably saw last month, Mark Zuckerberg announced that there were welcomed changes to Meta's policies, which recognize the public shift that we've had towards free speech. Zuckerberg said that he would do away with politically biased third-party fact checkers and move towards the X model of community notes and having more say from the people, more free speech. He also said that Meta was returning to its roots of free expression and allowing more sharing of news and political opinions in algorithms and on the platform. But yet again, thanks to Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, Canadians will still be banned from seeing news. Now, the cherry on top of all of this is that Trudeau spent the last week telling Canadians to buy Canada. He said to boycott American goods, and he went so far as even to say that we should cancel upcoming trips and vacations to the United States. And meanwhile, we learned that he is now using our tax dollar to pay for ads to one of the largest American corporations in the world, all just to promote his electioneering tax gimmicks. What a joke. What an absolute joke because it's Justin Trudeau. He's a hypocrite, and we all knew that. And I want to go a little bit deeper into this idea of this story that the media have been just so too happy to promote this idea that Canadians shouldn't be going to the United States. We shouldn't travel. An ex-user, Riot and Garrettson, pointed this out, and he showed how basically the entire legacy media were working hand in glove to promote this narrative that Canadians shouldn't travel to the United States. Here you can just see news story after news story after news story with the headline encouraging Canadians to cancel the trips, not go to the United States, not give any money. I think that this is part of a concerted effort by the legacy media to basically cover for Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau has seen, under Justin Trudeau's rule, we have seen patriotism and love of country in Canada absolutely plummet. And I think for good reason, right? You love your country on its good days and on its bad days. But at a certain point, when your country doesn't recognize the basic freedoms of Canadians, like we experienced during COVID, you see your prime minister able to just make an absolute mockery of the political system, manipulate it, use every trick in the book, even what we're living through right now. He prorogued Parliament so that there wouldn't be an election, so that he could remain in power, so that his Liberal Party could rebuild, so that they can install Mark Carney as the prime minister. And all of this is happening. Canadians don't have any kind of say. So I think there's pretty good reason why there's not a lot of love for Canada. And the media is just working in overtime to try to boost this idea of Canadian patriotism. So a recent poll showed, this is from Agnes Reid, True North is covering it, saying Canadian pride rebounds following Trump's tariff threat and the brief reprieve. So a survey conducted by the Agnes Reid Institute found that the percentage of Canadians who said that they were very proud to be Canadian has risen from 34% in December up to 44% now. So just in the past 35, 40 days, we've seen a 10% jump in patriotism for Canadians. The portion of those who express a deep emotional attachment to Canada has also climbed by 10%. So how is it that a trade dispute with our closest friend and ally has evoked this kind of patriotism? Well, it's partially because the media is working very, very hard to promote this narrative, this idea that we have to turn on our neighbor, turn on our friend, oppose the Americans, don't buy their stuff, don't visit their country. It's all, of course, folks, a distraction to distract you from the very real fact that it is Justin Trudeau and the Liberals who have imposed this harm onto Canadians. And if you look at the data going back, so we've got Canadian patriotism stats going back in 1985, 78% of Canadians said that they were very proud to be Canadian. By 2003, it had dropped down to 68%, but still pretty high, right? More than 2 out of 3 Canadians said that they were very proud to be Canadian. By the time Justin Trudeau took office, it was down to 52% in 2016. And after just 8 years in office, national pride hit a record low in 2024 of just 34% of people saying that they are proud to be Canadian. Isn't that sad? I mean, the reality, of course, is that it is because of the media narrative, right? They're the ones who have been telling us that our country was founded on genocide. They're the ones that said that early Canadians set up schools to impose genocide and murdered children. They're the ones that insisted on tearing down our statues, erasing our history, removing Sir John A. Macdonald's name from streets and schools and everything else. So we've had a decade-long campaign to make Canada this post-national state that Justin Trudeau so thoughtfully imagined. And then here we are with national pride at a record low. The media are trying to cover for Justin Trudeau now, pushing this idea of buy Canadian, that if you're on the political left, it's okay to wave the flag again. It's okay to be Canadian and to love Canadian. And it's all just to cover up for the fact that Justin Trudeau really has destroyed the country. Now, one of the areas I think that stands out the most when it comes to ways that Justin Trudeau has destroyed the country. And I know there's so many. You can talk about economics. You can talk about spending and borrowing, government growth. You can talk about immigration. To me, one of the major things that just completely shocks me about what's happened in Canada is the crime, is the number of home invasions, the carjackings, the incredible violence that we see pouring out onto our streets. And in part, it's fueled by drug wars and drug money. And the fact that we have even foreign nationals, but Canadians alike, involved in this dark world of transnational gangs producing and transporting drugs all over the world. That's why I thought it was a welcomed announcement yesterday that we saw from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who announced that if prime minister, he would impose life sentences for these thugs, for these fentanyl kingpins. Fentanyl is killing tens of thousands of Canadians. It's killing tens of thousands of Americans too. It's why President Trump is rightfully concerned and rightfully wants Canada to crack down on this absolute scourge. So again, yesterday, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre announced as prime minister he would impose mandatory life sentences on anyone involved in the trafficking, production, and distribution of over 40 milligrams of fentanyl, and 15 years for traffickers caught with between 20 and 40 milligrams. And our guest on today's program has been reporting and writing about these issues for years and years and years. I feel like he's finally getting vindicated because so many of the things that he's been telling us about are finally being recognized by the political class. I'm talking about Sam Cooper. Sam is an award-winning investigative journalist, best-selling author. You can find Sam's work on Substack. It is called The Bureau, and I recommend you head on over there and check it out. So Sam, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Glad to be here.
So why don't I just put the easy question to you first? Does Canada have a fentanyl problem in our country and at our border?
Canada has a massive fentanyl problem. My book, Willful Blindness, was ahead of the curve in recognizing that. I'll just give you a few data points. I found that a businessman, quote, businessman connected to Chinese organized crime that was running billions of dollars through BC government regulated casinos was caught with 85 tons of precursors for fentanyl and methamphetamine. That was back in around 2016. Recently, there's a super lab up in Falkland, BC, in a mountainous area tucked away there. It had a Mexican cartel fentanyl lab recipes, Chinese Mandarin labeled precursor boxes, and the Mounties said they were capable of producing 95 million doses of fentanyl, enough to kill every Canadian twice over. One more data point, 2022, the Vancouver port, there was 1,000 kilograms of fentanyl precursors caught by CBSA. They were disguised in toy bins, came in a container, I believe from China. So Vancouver's port, as I've reported, has been infiltrated on a deep scale by organized crime, specifically Chinese organized crime. And the Americans have been very concerned about this issue for years in Canada and our inability to prosecute fentanyl. And it's only coming to the surface now with Donald Trump's very harsh rhetoric against Canada. But all my expert sources in the US and Canada say Mr. Trump is right. And even the Biden administration was saying the same thing. And so we're facing a very serious problem.
I mean, it's frustrating that it takes a foreign entity like the Americans, like Donald Trump, to force Canada to recognize this. And I still see some pushback, Sam, in the media. Like there's a media narrative that Trump is just being irrational and that the border problem really is solely in Mexico and that the Canada thing is just sort of made up so that Trump can impose his economic tariff agenda. You can see here CNN writes that Canada makes up just 0.2% of U.S. border fentanyl seizures. And here this is a stat that's repeated often, Sam, that there's only been 43 pounds seized at the Canadian border, 43 pounds of fentanyl compared with 21,000 pounds of fentanyl on the Mexican border. So, they sort of downplay it. They make it seem like it's not really a big deal. I would argue it's probably because they're not inspecting vehicles in the same way across the Canada border. We did see some Canadian, quote unquote, Canadian truck drivers. Some of them were Indians on student visas to Canada, driving around with transport trucks full of drugs down in Indiana and other states. So can you help us sort of understand, like, why is it so few at the Canada border compared to the Mexico border? And is there truth to this media narrative that it's so much more of a problem for Mexico and smaller problem for Canada?
Well, I've looked into this for 10 years. So I saw you pulled up a name of a big former Toronto Star reporter. There, people are repeating at a surface level a data point, 40 pounds, at the land border. And you're right. The United States certainly has addressed the Mexican border in a much different way than the Canadian border. But people are missing the facts that I've laid out, that British Columbia for decades has been the Western hub in North America for Chinese organized crime. The individuals that have penetrated Vancouver real estate and port are the very same Chinese Communist Party sponsored tycoons that the U.S. military is concerned with in Panama. And by the way, Panama has reacted very quickly to threats that America won't put up with their port being under such, covert influence from China. So people are missing really the fact that we have a decentralized offshore node of China's fentanyl production in British Columbia. And let me reiterate those points. 1,000 kilograms of fentanyl precursors in 2022 into Vancouver Port, 85 tons of fentanyl and methamphetamine precursors seized from a Vancouver area businessman that I reported was working with Chinese organized crime casino money launderers. Those are figures that, if you extrapolate the amount of fentanyl pills they can produce, that can kill everyone in North America a few times over. And no one in law enforcement, indeed, not many reporters have deep law enforcement sources, but no one in Canada and the United States at a high level is disputing that British Columbia especially is a global node for fentanyl production. And it stems from China. The last point here is that, look, I republished an interview that I did with a Vancouver area mayor, Brad West, in 2023. He disclosed that Biden admin Secretary of State Antony Blinken came up to British Columbia and reached out directly to the only politician taking fentanyl seriously, Brad West. And Mr. West disclosed his discussion. The Biden administration was deeply concerned with Canada's legal loopholes and inability to prosecute fentanyl production and transnational organized crime, gaping holes in money laundering regulation. And, Canada's being used. And what I just said there indicates this is a Democratic Secretary of State saying, Canada, you need to work on something so we can have joint investigations. Now, of course, an honest person will recognize that's exactly what has come out of this phone call with President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau. The U.S. needs joint investigations and some sort of workaround with Canadian law.
Well, help us understand those gaping holes that exist in Canadian law and the extent to which we have these Chinese criminal entities operating in Canada. I think that that might come as a surprise to many viewers, the fact that these Chinese criminal gangs are able to operate in Canada. I know that Pierre Poilievre released a video yesterday talking about how he wants to bring in life sentences for people who are involved in the kingpins of this fentanyl trade. And that one of the laws that he mentioned was Bill C-5 the Liberals had brought in, which basically did away with mandatory minimums, and Poilievre would bring it back. But help us understand the laws that are needed, the holes, and how it is that China has been able to get such a foothold in Canada.
What we have in Canada is essentially a completely neutered RCMP that doesn't have the laws to investigate and prosecute money laundering. So that without getting into too many legal weeds, as my prosecutor expert sources, veterans tell me, there's no such thing as a money laundering defense or an organized crime defense in Canada from some very serious criminals without a Charter of Rights defense. And what that means is Canada has a huge difficulty in not only prosecuting massive money laundering offenses, but police can't get wiretaps on known Mexican cartel operatives or Chinese triad operatives that have set up in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. And if you're saying, where's the proof of this gaping weakness, the Toronto Dominion Bank case, where this Canadian bank is prosecuted in a deferred prosecution agreement, something like a $4 billion Canadian fine. And my American law enforcement sources said, look, the US government had to step up and point to the massive fentanyl money laundering running through that Canadian bank. And furthermore, their investigation showed that the what they call the command and control of the Chinese organized crime behind that money laundering operation is in Toronto and Vancouver. And they're setting up the whole money laundering system for the Mexican cartels that are, the ones pushing the fentanyl in American cities and streets. It's Chinese government supported criminals that are based in Toronto and Vancouver because of our weak laws that are running the Western Hemisphere money laundering. They're the masterminds of this. And as my DEA sources say, not many people know that Chinese organized crime is at the top of the food chain for international organized crime in the Western Hemisphere. It's not even the cartels. It's a whole economic system that's based on, money moving around the world in so-called underground banks that are connected to Chinese diaspora communities and organized crime that, shocking to believe, is supported by Beijing.
One of the things that Pierre was talking about in his video yesterday was how there are these super labs that exist in Canada. You mentioned Falkland, British Columbia. I think there was a raid and they found just incredibly sophisticated drug super labs that, are straight out of a Hollywood movie or Breaking Bad. Who set them up? Like, where are they coming from? Why are the Chinese allowed to operate like this in Canada?
I've been talking to off the record police sources on that Falkland lab case for a while. So let's draw the mind map. This massive industrial scale lab is tucked up into a mountainous town not too far from the Alberta border in British Columbia that has 2 police officers. So it's up there in the woods. There's a fairly, I'm told, sizable motorcycle outlaw gang population in the area. But my sources are very firm in saying this is Mexican cartel run, Chinese triad run, and there are even, as I am told, Iranian state-sponsored crime indications in this operation at the highest levels. And so it could be, the very well-entrenched biker gangs and the street gangs in BC that are running the product around. But when it comes to shipping the precursors into Vancouver's port, remember those 1,000-kilogram seizures I told you about? There's a lot that's not being seized. It's being moved into Vancouver's port, which is controlled by organized crime pretty extensively. Those precursors are sent up to an area of British Columbia with not many police. And then the product, the RCMP confirmed this, is exported out of British Columbia. So it goes, as I know, to Australia, it goes to Japan, it goes to the United States, and that's by shipping. And it gets very complex. I come back to your question, why is so little comparatively caught at a land border? Well, it's being shipped back out of Vancouver port and moved around the world in sophisticated ways.
Can you help us understand, why don't they find it in the ports? Like, what is the procedure? Like, are people just allowed to pack their own trailers and put them in without inspection? I'm just trying to wrap my head around how so much drugs are passing through our Canadian cities without being stopped and detected.
This is a huge story. And again, this is why the US intelligence and law enforcement community and politicians like Trump now very openly are concerned. In the 1990s, we had federal port police in Vancouver. As I've written in Willful Blindness, my book, and for the Bureau very recently, documents say that Canadian police were afraid, were outraged when the Christian government pulled the federal port police out of Vancouver and in Canada's other ports and privatized those ports. So what occurred is that foreign organized crime entities were able to apply for docking facilities in Vancouver. The Hells Angels infiltrated the Union. Let's just keep focused on Vancouver. And as one of my police expert sources, Gary Clement, says, who's investigated this for years and warned about it for years with no result, the fox is running the hen house for the ports. There's maybe the latest figures I hear are 1 to at top 5% of containers coming in to Vancouver port are searched. And some of this is open source information. Some of it, I'm telling you, is historical intelligence documents. And some of it is off the record, very fresh and current intelligence from Canadian police sources that say they don't like hearing what Donald Trump's saying more than anyone else. But Donald Trump, unfortunately, is right. We can't defend ourselves.
Well, I mean, thankfully, Trump is pointing it out because, I mean, what you described, it's kind of like a United Nations of bad guys in Canada operating these drug communities,
Absolutely.
Iranians, Mexicans, Chinese. I wonder if that's what Justin Trudeau envisioned when he called Canada the first post-national state. I know Pierre Poilievre has been hammering Trudeau on this. I want to play a clip. This was from back in December. And Pierre Poilievre explains how it's Justin Trudeau's agenda that has led to this crisis. Let's play this clip.
Results are in on the Prime Minister's radical liberalization of hard drugs. He teamed up with the BC NDP to decriminalize fentanyl, crack, and heroin. He lowered jail sentences for mass producers of deadly fentanyl. And 80% of the fentanyl made in Canada is done so using ingredients that are not even regulated, but come right into our country where they're cooked into that poison, now threatening our trade relationship with the U.S. Will he reverse his radical liberal drug agenda to save lives and jobs?
So this was back in December 2024, Pierre pointing out that it's also to do with Justin Trudeau's drug policies. I want to share a post that Pierre Poilievre put on social media back in August of 2024. I couldn't believe this. Like, I had to ask my staff to am I reading this right? Like, what am I missing here? Because it was so outrageous. Sean, if we can show this image here. This is a post on Instagram of a company. So Pierre Poilievre is sharing this as a tweet, but the picture that you can see is of the caption says a beautiful chunk of fentanyl. Okay. And so this is, as Pierre points out, one of Justin Trudeau's drug dens wants to share with you a beautiful chunk of fentanyl, a dangerous hard drug that destroys the lives of tens of thousands of people. Shut down these wacko drug dens, ban hard drugs, fund treatment and recovery, and bring our loved ones home drug free. Like, I couldn't believe. So the original post was from a group called the Kensington Market Overdose Prevention Site. This is one of the government funded, they call it an anti-harm site or prevention site, but they're actually celebrating and calling it a beautiful chunk of fentanyl. I mean, I just don't understand how anyone can look at fentanyl and think that, hey, I need to share this on social media. It's so beautiful. So can you help me understand, how is Justin Trudeau's drug laws also allowing all of this to happen?
This is an issue that I have outsourced for the Bureau to a reporter that's really dug in named Adam Zivo. It's called Safer Supply. It's been called harm reduction, which is, a medical idea that we can lessen the harms of some very, very impoverished and often mentally sort of ill people that are abusing drugs. But what Safer Supply does is it gives out, Medical Health Canada opioids. They're called Dilyalute. I'm going to get the name wrong. The kids call them dillies. This is a type of pharmaceutical that BC pharmacies are legislated to give out to addicts to get them off so-called toxic heroin and fentanyl. And what's happening is that organized crime dealers just swoop in and take the dillies or the Canadian regulated pharmaceuticals that are given to addicts, and they up and sell them, across Canada. Internationally, it has come out. So organized crime is taking this government substitute heroin or opioids and is using the proceeds to deal more fentanyl. And I think that's what Mr. Poilievre is getting towards. There is, within what could have started as a good idea, sort of let's treat the epidemic in our streets with a medical sort of approach, it hasn't turned out. And then so you get radical populations of pharmacists and harm reductionists that will post a picture of beautiful, what you and I know is life-destroying fentanyl. And it's just, I mean, it's an example of an ideology that's run. There's no common sense to it. It just makes a bad problem worse, in a nutshell.
It's so unbelievable to me that they would be like celebrating a drug that kills thousands and thousands of Canadians per year. Like, I didn't even know that fentanyl was a drug that people took. I thought it was something that was like accidentally put in other drugs. So I didn't know that myself, but unbelievable the fact that the Trudeau government is involved with giving sick people like deadly street drugs. Sam, I really want to ask you a final question, unrelated. Since I have you on the show, I know that this is right up your wheelhouse. So we had that parliamentary report that came out last week saying that really there was no foreign interference. After all that, after 2 years of headlines, nobody acted in bad faith. So I'm just wondering, I know we only have a few minutes, but what was your takeaway from that report?
Well, I didn't hold back very much when I went on a podcast with 3 former CSIS officers, and we all are of the opinion that the report of Justice Hogue is, there's no other way to put it but a whitewash, or you could call it David Johnston 2.0. A number of people have pointed out, unfortunately, that I wanted to give the justice a chance to see what she would do with the evidence. And with her whitewash report, I think it's important to point out that others have noted historically, she and her former law firm had close connections to 2 Liberal prime ministers, one of them related to Justin Trudeau, his father, Pierre Trudeau. So it looks like a situation where I think the good of the Hogue Commission is that thousands of documents came out. And so reporters, diligent, curious Canadians can go in and read the evidence for themselves. There's no denying that China has deeply interfered in our recent elections, but there's also no denying that the commission was given a very narrow mandate, which Justice Hogue admitted, a small time frame to look into these concerns. And at the end of the day, came to a completely different conclusion than, as you know, the NSI Cup 2024 report from bipartisan panel of parliamentarians that reviewed something like thousands of the same documents that the Hogue Commission did. And they came to the finding that there are Canadian parliamentarians wittingly working with foreign governments. So I just can't reconcile those 2 different findings. And looking at the evidence without any bias, I think the evidence, and also my private knowledge of more evidence that didn't come out, supports the conclusion that indeed there are politicians wittingly working with foreign governments, benefiting knowingly from foreign government support. And I'll add one quote that never made it into a story with my former employer. My colleague Stuart Bell talked to one of his RCMP sources for one of our stories, and the source said, the amount of politicians entangled in foreign interference is large, and the honest ones had better wake up and understand what they're getting involved with.
It's unbelievable. You know, there's so much huffing and puffing over Donald Trump's comments and jest about Canada becoming the 51st state, and Canadians jumping up and down demanding that we maintain our sovereignty and maintain our independence. Meanwhile, we have our parliament that is at risk of foreign interference and our elections at risk of foreign interference. And we have drug kingpins from all over the world operating in Canada. It doesn't really paint a very optimistic picture of the sovereignty of Canada. I think we really have our work cut out for you, cut out for us. Sam, what do you think?
I believe so. And, you know, I'll add this. My information, and I'm conversant with U.S. intelligence officials and politicians versed in U.S. intelligence, is that the U.S. government at a bipartisan level has a deep concern with Canada's incapacity to counter foreign interference, most specifically from China, but also Iranian state-sponsored crime and terror networks and individuals that want to use Canada's borders to hurt the United States. That's the concern. And that's why Mr. President Trump is saying some very hurtful, but a lot of it truthful things towards Canada. And my last observation is I find a level of denial from what a lot of people call the Laurentian elite that has kind of run this country for 40 years and has run it in a bad direction, I think. And we're seeing what the end result of that is right now.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining the show, and keep up the incredible work that you do. You're one of the best, if not the best, investigative journalist, independent journalist in the country. So thanks for all your work, and thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much.
And really, everybody should go check out Sam Cooper's Substack. It's called The Bureau. Subscribe over there to help support his work, because from best I can tell, he is one of the only ones who not only has this information at his fingertips, has the expertise and the knowledge to find the information, but also has the courage and the bravery to expose it. Because believe me, when you're exposing this kind of information about the worst people, the absolute worst people in Canada, it definitely comes with some risks. So we want to do everything we can to support a fellow independent journalist over there. Okay, I do want to get to Mark Carney, because I think this was quite the gaffe. It really shows us what Carney is really thinking. You know, so there's so much made about how Mark Carney is sort of like a new and improved Justin Trudeau, that he has the same beliefs as Justin Trudeau, but somehow he's better put together and he looks more like a prime minister, and he has this banking background and this very fancy education. I don't think he's a very good politician. And it's clips like this that make me think that. But first, I'm going to introduce our next guest on the show, who is Julien Newman. He is an entrepreneur and the former head organizer for the NDP under Tom Mulcair, and he ran Quebec operations for that party under Jack Layton, someone we had on the show before. So I will welcome Julien now. Hey, Julien, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back, Candice.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Okay, let's play this clip. I want to show the audience what I'm talking about here. This is Mark Carney at a campaign stop in Windsor, Ontario, yesterday, February 5th, talking to reporters. And this sounds like a canned line. I think that he pre-prepared this. So this is where his campaign is coming from. Let's play that clip.
There's a fever gripping America. And while it rages, Canadians will remain resolute and true to our values. While America engages in a war on woke, Canadians will continue to value inclusiveness.
So he's talking about a fire raging in the United States. I don't know. It sounds like a movement that I want to be part of. Mark Carney says that the war on woke is something that he will not do and he'll fight against. So I guess that means that he wants to fight a war for woke in exchange for exclusivity. I don't know if you got the memo. Like, 2018 is long over. 2025, people don't like that stuff anymore. Julien, what was your take on this?
Exactly the same as you. It's like the war on woke is over. The war on woke finished 5 years ago. In my job as an entrepreneur, I spend most of my time with like Fortune 500 CEOs and like Davos type people. This is what they were saying and thinking like 8 years ago. Like, nobody's on board for this stuff anymore. I mostly live in California. People in California are over this stuff. Like, this guy it's like, 2012 is calling and they want their style back.
Well, it just seems to me that when you look at like what has happened, right? There was this cultural moment where you had Black Lives Matter, you had in Canada the story of the unmarked graves, and there was just a lot of like consternation, and it moved right into the corporate world where all of a sudden all the banks and all the corporations were really just pushing pride down our throat. They've been doing it for years. They've been doing it for decades, really. But it just really ramped up. I think post-COVID, we were all a little crazy, and all of a sudden, everybody's pronouns were showing up in their bios and on their right after their names on social media. And it was like they were really pushing it. And I think that one of the things that came out of the 2024 election was a big sort of FU, pardon my language, but we're done with it. We're done with boys playing in girls sports. We're done with this whole idea that we have to use your preferred pronoun or like any number of things. I don't think that Canada's had like a total sudden shift. I think we still have our work cut out for us in this country to rid the sort of ideological scourge that exists, especially in our education system. But I think as a general vibe, the zeitgeist in our culture right now, this is wrong. And so I'm just wondering, like, who's advising Mark Carney Why does he think that this is a good line? And for you, Julien, from the NDP perspective, like if the Liberals want to go hard woke again, what do you think the NDP should do in that situation?
Well, I can tell you what the NDP should do, which is to, just be normal. What the NDP will do is the complete opposite of that. I mean, if you look at Jagmeet Singh's Twitter, like his Twitter bio, the first thing in his Twitter bio is, please pronounce my name properly. It's pronounced Jagmeet. It's like, dude, no one cares. Your name's Jagmeet. We speak English here. Like, get over it. So, they're also stuck in this weird rabbit hole. Like, I think the only two humans alive today who care about this stuff, other than Mark Carney, are like Justin and Jagmeet. But who's advising Mark Carney? It's probably just him. This is probably really what he thinks, because he's like so stuck in his banker bubble in London.
Yeah, the sort of BlackRock agenda, the WEF agenda. I want to tie this to what Donald Trump is doing down in the States. It's just been fast and furious, one executive order after another. It has conservatives like me just like cheering and applauding and waiting for the moment when we can implement this kind of stuff in Canada. Hopefully it'll be soon. Hopefully it will be under a Pierre Poilievre government, but maybe not. Maybe we still need a strong PPC, section to be pushing this kind of stuff even harder, because I don't know that the conservatives will come all the way around, even though they definitely should. But yesterday, Donald Trump signed this incredible executive order. I want to play the clip because the imagery is just so beautiful here. It's such a win for Donald Trump, such a win for conservatives. He signed this executive order that will ban men from playing in women's sports. I can't believe this is even controversial. The whole point of women's sports is so that girls can have a chance to play without getting hurt and without having to compete against someone who has an unfair advantage because they're bigger and stronger. So here was Trump on Wednesday signing this executive order.
Oh, I think we have a 10. We have a 10.
God bless you, Mr. President.
So the order, titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports, mandates that Title IX, the federal law banning sex discrimination in schools, be interpreted as prohibiting the participation of transgendered girls and women in female sports. Trump said that we will not allow men to beat up, injure, or cheat our women or our girls. From now on, women's sports will only be for women. Amen. I just want to show you one more post, because when I read this, Julien, I thought of you, because I think maybe this might be how you feel, but you can tell me what you think. So this is a philosophy professor at Open University named John Pike, and he writes this. He says, "How could the left, my side, the clever side, the critical side, the informed side, the anti-sexist side, be so deeply stupid as to hand this victory to someone who is none of these things?" So I think that is someone on the political left who gets it. What do you think?
I think that's how everybody, like every actual real human leftist feels. You have these people who posture online to get like Twitter bots to like their tweets. They think that, all this strange stuff is the way to go. I haven't met a single NDP member, and I assume it's the same in the Liberal Party, who is still on board with this stuff. Like, they just don't exist in the wild.
Interesting. I mean, I don't agree with what John Pike, the professor, said there, because I don't think that the left is actually the clever, critical, informed, anti-sexist side. I think a lot of the sort of hidden undertones, particularly of the trans movement, was at its core quite anti-woman. The fact that they couldn't even define what a woman was, and it always seemed to be aimed at women, not men. They still had an easier time defining what a man is, because everyone knows what a man is. But it was particularly women, and I've seen this because I've been critical of trans sex change surgeries, of cross-sex hormones, especially given to children. I've seen my fair share of vitriol from these people online who are very animated and very angry. And I think a lot of it is sort of, just disguised hatred. But they did sort of rule the day, right? Everyone in corporate Canada and the political left, Trudeau, Singh, both parties sort of embrace this thing wholeheartedly. It's going to be interesting if they walk it back. if Mark Carney continues to go full-fledged and is so-called against the war on woke. Do you think this will be a ballot box question in the upcoming election? And what is the correct position for people on the left to be taking on this issue?
I think the correct position for people on the left is to say this is just not an important issue for us. This has nothing to do with the left. This has something to do with something else that's just not left. It's not right. It has nothing to do with that. Like the left, my definition of left is you're on the side of workers and normal people who have jobs, and that's what you should be focused on. And on this issue, right? What do most normal, regular people who have jobs think of it? That is left-wing position. There is another position, and it's the kind of like 50 people live around the University of Toronto and are unemployed and have nothing to do but to tweet. Those people have their own position. I think they brand themselves as left, but if you want to get the 50 votes, go for it. But if you want to get real Canadians, whether you're Mark Carney or Jagmeet Singh, you should be talking about things they care about.
Okay, well, let's talk about the Canadian political situation right now, because we're sort of in this weird situation where we're dealing with a national crisis, but we don't have parliament. Parliament's not in session because Justin Trudeau prorogued it. You have Pierre Poilievre calling for parliament to get back in session so that we can possibly pass a bunch of bills and measures to beef up the border security, possibly provide aid to workers if there is a trade war. But then at the same time, Jagmeet Singh had said that if parliament is recalled, he'll immediately call an election. So there's kind of a contradiction where it's like, we want to get parliament back, but as soon as parliament's back, we're going to have a non-confidence vote to pull the plug on government to force an election. So we wouldn't be able to pass any of these kind of spending bills anyways. And then you had Jagmeet Singh kind of hinting at the fact that maybe he won't pull the plug on the government. So this is a clip from last week, Tuesday, January 28th, right, before the tariffs were imposed and before Trump reversed the tariffs. So he was speaking at a press conference where he says, maybe we just won't. Let's play that clip.
If Trump follows through on his plan with tariffs, would you keep the Liberals in power and allow for the passage of a work relief program before supporting a non-confidence motion?
I'll just start off by the fact that I've spoken with a lot of workers who are deeply worried about what the Trump tariffs might mean. We do need to have a plan in place to support those that are impacted, those businesses, those workers, most importantly. If there is any desire to move forward, the government should call us together, like we did during COVID, and discuss a plan that supports workers.
So he's talking about discussing a plan, having everybody together. That doesn't really sound like I'm going to pull the plug and force an election the second we get back, which is what he implied before. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying Jagmeet has no plan to trigger an election. And we've actually our group has been doing quite substantive investigations into what's going on the ground. I've been working with several news outlets to try to get them to write a piece on this. So I can get back to that. But, on the broader situation, I think it's, much worse than what you described. Like, our prime minister has quit, right? We have our parliament, who are the only people that Canadians vote for in the Canadian political system, they've been dissolved. There's no parliament. The ministers, they're like jockeying to like keep their job in the next, with whoever becomes the prime minister. And then like the opposition leaders, right? And this includes the Conservatives and the NDP and the Bloc, everybody. Their incentive is not to look out for Canada's interests. It's to do electioneering so that they win the next election or don't get wiped out in the case of the NDP. Like what Canada needs is a real functional government. What Canada needs is an election so that people can get into a normal situation and they can have the incentive, which is a right incentive, just to look out for Canada. Because right now, nobody wants to do that because it's counterproductive for them to be on the side of Canada. They're incentivized to be on the side of themselves.
Well, you certainly saw that. I think that so much of the posturing around the Trump tariff war was really designed to boost Justin Trudeau's public approval rating, which doesn't make sense to your point that he supposedly quit. I mean, he told us that he was resigning, and then he didn't actually resign. So he said he was intending to resign eventually, and now we're stuck with him in this complete ridiculous lame duck scenario. And then meanwhile, we have Mark Carney, who's basically being selected and put in as prime minister. And he's saying that he's regularly in communication with cabinet and making comments to Trump about the trade war. Hello, he's not even the Liberal leader yet. I do think he'll win, and I do presume that he will be our next prime minister, but he's not at this point. So he has no business telling cabinet ministers what to do or being in communication with them. I don't even know if he has security clearance. It's totally making a mockery of our system. And it's no wonder, I talked about it off the top of the show, how pride in Canada has plummeted. It's incredible. Back in the 80s, pride in Canada was like almost universal. It was like 80%, 85% of Canadians loved being Canadian and felt very, very proud. And under this government, under what has happened with Justin Trudeau, it's down to 34%. Now the media are doing their best to try to boost him back up, and he's gotten a little boost with this Trump back and forth, which again makes me a little bit cynical about whether it wasn't all just an act to try to boost his public opinion and what Canadians think of him. What do you think?
I think Justin Trudeau is fixated on two things. One, sabotaging Chrystia Freeland, who he now hates. And two, pandering to whoever would give him a job, or maybe even has already committed to giving him a job after he leaves. I mean, and that's not like, that is what you would expect from a normal human being. Like in a month from now, he'll be unemployed, or maybe he'll have some big job somewhere, right? And Chrystia Freeland just screwed him over. I don't blame him for doing that, right? Like that's what anybody would do. It's probably what I would do. That's why we need a proper real government and a proper real prime minister. And that's why we need an election to be called, in December. And that's why we need an election be called, in April, I guess. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we're on track for having an election called anytime soon. And we're going to be stuck in this complete shit show in a very dangerous situation. The Liberals are to blame, but the NDP too.
Okay, so
Jagmeet.
Jagmeet. Okay, so I want to ask you this because there's been these sort of videos and rumors circulating online that we might not actually have an election, right? So many Canadians were saying, phew, Justin Trudeau's resigned. That's got to mean that we're going to have an election. We do have an Elections Canada Act that says that every 4 years there must be an election. So that would bring us to October. Then you had Jagmeet Singh saying he was going to pull the plug so we could have an election. Presumably that would happen at the end of March when the Liberal leader is installed as Prime Minister, giving us a May election. But then there's been this constitutional theory that the Elections Canada Act can actually be rewritten by the legislature, and that our constitution only says that every 5 years is when an election must happen, meaning that we wouldn't have one until October of 2026, meaning another, 18 months of this Liberal NDP coalition government. So in order for that to happen, presumably, again, Mark Carney is going to be the prime minister. He's going to be installed. And all he would have to do is negotiate a deal with Jagmeet, maybe say, hey, you can come and be in my cabinet. You can be part of my inner circle of decision makers. All you have to do is sign this piece of paper, sign away your soul. You've already done it. So you might as well make another deal with the devil here. And Canadians could have to live through 18 months of an unelected Mark Carney prime ministership. What do you think of that?
So I'd say, one, nobody on the ground in the NDP is preparing for an election in a month and a half or 2 months. They're just not. So they don't think, or the NDP as an institution doesn't think there's going to be an election in April, or at least they're not acting as if they think that. So that's one thing. The second thing is, as you say, this sort of fixed election date law that was set up, that's not how Canada's system works. Canada's system isn't that. There is no fixed election date in a parliamentary system. And, there's no reason why they can't prolong it further out. You know, it's not like we've been doing this. It's not this like set thing that we've been doing for hundreds of years. Like it's happened like once or whatever. And, you know, they can say, well, there's this big crisis, blah, blah, blah. So that's entirely plausible. And on the Jagmeet front, his incentive, look, as things stand, Jagmeet is going to lose his seat. He will no longer be a member of parliament. Presumably that means he'll get booted out as leader of the NDP. And like, what is he going to do afterwards? Like, this is a guy with no skills, right? What he wants, the only way he personally keeps his seat is if the Liberals do better, right? Like in Burnaby South, I think they've renamed it, his riding. It's kind of like a three-way race where he wins. The Liberals, if the Liberals are doing really, really badly, you know, their vote goes to the Conservatives and Jagmeet will lose. If the Liberals are doing better, Jagmeet won't lose. Maybe a bunch of his caucus members will lose. Maybe the NDP will get clobbered everywhere else, but he'll keep his seat. And again, right, like that's what you have to expect that he's going to do. And that is just really, 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 really bad for Canada and for Canadians. And I don't know, like it's the absolute worst thing that anybody could possibly do right now.
I mean, it's a coup. And the fact that, you say no one in the NDP is preparing for an election, that's a tell. I don't know that we're going to have an election in the next few months, as so many of us believe. We might not even have one in 2025. It's so unbelievable. I can't even begin to imagine what that will do to our country and our democracy and our faith in our institutions. Julien, kind of a sad note to be ending the interview on, but I do appreciate your insight. It's nice to have a sane person on the left who's willing to speak the truth and come on the show. So we'll definitely have to have you back. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Candice.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for those watching live. We finally figured out how to stream this live on X. So we'll be doing this show every day, Monday to Friday. It's a news show, but it's got opinions and it's got interviews, bit of color, and we love putting it together for you. So thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, we will be back again tomorrow with all the news. I'm your host, Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you, and God bless.